When the judge raised the gavel to seal his life sentence, two strangers walked into the courtroom. No one knew them, but the moment they spoke, everything stopped. 20 years earlier, a black man had saved their lives. Now, it was their turn to save his. The winter night was cruel, the kind that bit into the skin and made every breath sting like shards of ice. The streets were nearly empty, and most people had already locked themselves inside their warm homes. Marcus walked with his head low, his hands shoved deep into his worn jacket pockets, trying to block out the cold after another long shift at the factory. He was exhausted, his body aching, his mind weighed down with thoughts of bills he could barely keep up with. But as he passed the alley beside a broken streetlight, he noticed something unusual, a faint rustling sound, almost like a whimper. Curiosity tugged at him. He turned his head and saw two small figures curled against the dumpster. At first, he thought they were stray animals, but as he stepped closer, his heart sank. They were children. A boy and a girl, thin as twigs, their faces pale and dirty, their clothes ragged and far too light for the freezing night. The girl tried to shield her younger brother with her arms, but both of them trembled violently. Their lips were blue, and their eyes carried the heavy look of hopelessness. Marcus froze for a moment. He didn't know these children, and helping them would mean more responsibility than he could handle. He could barely take care of himself as it was. He thought of walking away, of convincing himself that someone else would step in. But then the boy looked up at him, his eyes wide with silent pleading, and something inside Marcus shifted. He couldn't. Not tonight. Not when their lives clearly hung by a thread. Slowly, he removed his thick coat and wrapped it around both children, kneeling down so they could feel the warmth. "You're safe now," he whispered, his voice steady though his heart pounded. He held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, the little girl placed her fragile fingers in his. Marcus knew his life had just changed. He wasn't just walking home anymore, he was walking into a story that would define the rest of his days. Marcus walked quickly through the frozen streets, the two children huddled close at his sides. The boy leaned heavily against him, shivering under the oversized coat, while the girl clutched Marcus's rough hand as though it was the only solid thing left in her world. Every step he took was heavy with doubt. He had no real savings, no family to lean on, and his apartment was already too small for one person. Bringing these kids home was reckless, maybe even foolish. But when he glanced down at their fragile faces, he knew he couldn't have left them behind. When they reached his building, Marcus hesitated for a second at the door, staring at the peeling paint and the dimly lit hallway inside. It wasn't much, and he often felt ashamed of it, but tonight it became a shelter, a place where two lost children could finally breathe. He unlocked the door and led them into his modest one-bedroom apartment. The heater rattled weakly, the walls were cracked, and the furniture was old, but compared to the cold streets, it felt like heaven. The children stood silently in the doorway, unsure if they could trust this stranger. Marcus moved slowly, careful not to frighten them. He set a pot of water on the stove and pulled out the last packets of instant noodles from the cupboard. The smell of warm broth soon filled the air, and he noticed how their eyes lit up at the sight of real food. They ate quickly, as though every bite might disappear if they waited too long. Marcus watched them with a mix of sorrow and relief. He knew what hunger looked like, but on their tiny faces, it broke him in a way he couldn't describe. After dinner, he gave them blankets and a spot on his bed, choosing to sleep on the floor himself. As he lay there, staring at the cracked ceiling, Marcus knew this decision would change everything. He didn't have the answers to what came next, but one truth anchored him: tonight, two children would sleep safe and warm, and for the first time in a long time, he felt. The next morning, sunlight crept through the torn curtains, filling the small apartment with a pale glow. Marcus rose quietly from the hard floor where he had slept, his body stiff and sore, but his heart strangely lighter than it had been in years. He turned and saw the two children still bundled in the blankets, curled up against each other like kittens. For the first time in who knows how long, their breathing was calm and steady. Marcus couldn't help but smile. When they finally stirred awake, their eyes darted around the unfamiliar room. The girl pulled her brother closer, protectively shielding him. Marcus crouched down to meet their eyes, his tone soft. "It's all right," he said. "You're safe here." "My name is Marcus." The little boy said nothing, but the girl spoke shyly, her voice rough from cold and hunger. "I'm Lily," she whispered, then pointed to her brother. "This is Ben." The way she held herself showed she had been forced to grow up too soon, but beneath the toughness, Marcus saw only a frightened child. He offered them breakfast, just toast and eggs, the kind of meal he often stretched to last himself through the week. But to Lily and Ben, it was a feast. They ate slowly this time, as though afraid to appear greedy, their manners shining through even in their hunger. Marcus noticed their gratitude in every glance and every careful bite, and it stirred something deep inside him. That day, he found clothes that no longer fit him, cutting and stitching them until the children could wear them. He searched for old books he had kept from school, sliding them across the table with a quiet hope that maybe learning could bring them comfort. Neighbors muttered when they saw Marcus with the two pale children, whispering questions, judging silently. But he ignored the looks. Love, he thought, did not care about color, nor about blood. As the days stretched into weeks, Lily and Ben slowly began to laugh again, their voices filling the small apartment with a song. Life settled into a fragile rhythm inside Marcus's small apartment, but beneath the surface, struggles pressed down like heavy chains. Every morning before dawn, Marcus woke quietly, careful not to disturb Lily and Ben as they slept. He laced up his worn boots and headed out to work at the factory, where long hours left his body aching and his hands raw. At night, he returned to find the children waiting at the door, their faces lighting up as though his tired smile was the brightest thing in their world. That look alone made every hardship worth enduring. But the reality was harsh. Money was always short, and every paycheck seemed to vanish the moment it came. Rent, food, clothes for the children, each expense was a battle. Some nights Marcus ate less just so Lily and Ben could have enough. He hid his hunger behind excuses, saying he wasn't in the mood to eat, but the children weren't fooled. Lily, wise beyond her years, often saved part of her meal and quietly slid it toward him when she thought he wasn't looking. The struggles weren't only financial. The neighbors whispered whenever Marcus walked the children to school. Some stared openly, their eyes filled with suspicion. "Why would a black man raise two white children?" they muttered. Others went further, accusing him of keeping them for sympathy or questioning his intentions outright. Each cruel remark cut deep, but Marcus never let the children see his pain. Instead, he held their hands tighter, walking proudly with his head high. At work, things weren't easier. His boss complained when Marcus asked for extra shifts, coworkers mocked him for playing father to kids that weren't his, and some even warned him he was inviting trouble. But every night, when Lily showed him her school essays and Ben handed him new sketches full of imagination, Marcus felt the struggles fade. Their laughter softened the weight on his shoulders, reminding him why he endured it all. Though the world seemed against him, Marcus F. As the years passed, the tiny apartment that had once been a shelter for survival slowly turned into a home filled with warmth and memories. Marcus never missed a school meeting, no matter how exhausted he was after work. He sat in the back of classrooms, his rough hands folded, listening proudly as teachers praised Lily's sharp mind and Ben's artistic talent. Each compliment was a quiet confirmation that his sacrifices were not in vain. Lily blossomed into a determined young girl, always carrying a book in her hands. She loved asking questions, debating ideas, and dreaming of one day becoming a lawyer. Ben, on the other hand, lived with colors and lines dancing in his mind. He filled pages with sketches, houses, trees, even portraits of Marcus that captured not just his features but his spirit. Whenever Ben handed Marcus a drawing, Marcus hung it on the wall with care, turning cracked plaster into a gallery of love. At home, evenings became sacred. Marcus cooked simple meals while Lily read aloud at the table, and Ben doodled beside her. Sometimes, the three of them laughed so hard at silly jokes that neighbors knocked on the wall to quiet them down. Other nights, when bills loomed and Marcus's face showed his worry, the children comforted him with hugs that erased his doubts. They weren't connected by blood, but their hearts had stitched together a bond no one could deny. Still, the world outside didn't always see it that way. Some parents questioned why their children played with Lily and Ben, whispering things Marcus pretended not to hear. But Lily and Ben never wavered in calling him Dad. They said it so naturally that Marcus often had to blink back tears. He hadn't asked for the title, but it had grown out of love, trust, and countless small moments that built their life together. Every day, Marcus reminded himself that he hadn't just rescued 2 children that night, he had been rescued too. Their laughter gave him strength, their dreams gave him purpose. Life seemed to be moving forward, fragile but hopeful, until one night everything changed. Marcus had just finished a double shift at the factory, his body drained, his shirt still damp with sweat. The streets were quiet as he walked home, carrying a bag of groceries he'd picked up for the kids. He didn't know that only a few blocks away, a robbery had taken place. 2 masked men had stormed a corner store, leaving behind chaos and a badly injured clerk. When the police arrived, desperate for answers, someone pointed in Marcus's direction. He was a black man walking alone at night, and to them, that was enough. The flashing lights came out of nowhere. Sirens cut through the stillness as police cars surrounded him. Hands up, they shouted, their voices sharp with suspicion. Confused, Marcus dropped the grocery bag, apples rolling across the pavement. He tried to explain, he'd just left work, he didn't know anything about a robbery, but the more he spoke, the less they listened. They pressed him against the wall, handcuffs biting into his wrists, as if his words had no weight. By the time he reached the station, the story had already been written against him. Witnesses described a man in dark clothes, tall and broad-shouldered, details vague enough to fit him. The fact that he was a hard-working father trying to get home to 2 children meant nothing. Marcus sat under the harsh light of the interrogation room, his heart pounding not just from fear but from the thought of Lily and Ben waiting for him. Would they think he had abandoned them? The news spread quickly, and whispers turned into judgments. Neighbors who had once smiled now avoided his eyes. I knew something wasn't right, some said. He looked the type. The color of his skin had become the evidence, and the life he had built piece by piece was suddenly at risk of collapsing. That night marked the beginning of a storm Marcus never saw coming. The children he had saved would soon have to decide if they cow. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and old papers, but to Marcus it felt like a cage. He sat at the defendant's table, his wrists cold from the steel cuffs, his heart heavier than any chain. The prosecutor spoke with sharp confidence, painting him as a dangerous man, someone capable of violence. Each word was like a stone being thrown, and Marcus could do nothing but sit and listen as strangers rewrote his life into a crime story that wasn't his. The evidence was thin, built on assumptions and the shaky memory of a frightened witness. But Marcus quickly realized that facts didn't matter here. What mattered was perception. He was a black man accused of robbery and violence, and to the jury, that seemed enough. They avoided his eyes, looking at him as if the verdict had already been decided before the trial even began. His public defender tried, but his voice lacked the fire of the prosecutor. He spoke of Marcus's job, of his quiet life, of the children who depended on him, but the words fell flat against the thick wall of prejudice in the room. Marcus clenched his fists, his mind flashing with images of Lily and Ben. He could almost see them sitting at home, waiting for him to return, not knowing their father was fighting for his freedom in a battle already tilted against him. When the clerk read the jury's decision, the room was silent except for the sound of Marcus's own heartbeat. Guilty. The word struck him like a blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He wanted to shout, to demand justice, to beg them to see the truth, but his voice caught in his throat. The judge's gavel came down with finality, and a life sentence hung over his head like a dark cloud. In that moment, Marcus realized he had been betrayed, not just by the system, but by a society that never gave him the benefit of the doubt. The walls closed in, the courtroom blurred, and as guards led him away, one thought haunted him: who would protect Lily and Ben now? Years slipped by like shadows, yet Marcus never let go of the memory of Lily and Ben. Locked behind cold steel bars, he carried their laughter in his heart, their dreams echoing in his mind. He often feared they had been lost to the world, that the system would swallow them just as it had swallowed him. But what he didn't know was that the two children he had once rescued were growing, learning, and silently preparing for the day they could rescue him. On the morning of his sentencing appeal, Marcus stood in the courtroom again, his hands trembling as guards guided him inside. The air felt heavy, every eye in the room set against him. The judge prepared to speak, his gavel raised high, when suddenly the double doors burst open. All heads turned. Two figures stepped into the room, not children anymore but strong, confident adults. Lily, dressed in a sharp lawyer's suit, carried herself with the determination of someone who had spent years fighting for truth. Beside her stood Ben, tall and steady, holding a thick folder of documents in his hands. Their presence sent a ripple of shock through the courtroom. "Your Honor," Lily said, her voice steady though her eyes shimmered with emotion. "Before you sentence this man, you need to hear the truth." She gestured toward Marcus. "This is our father. He saved us from the streets when we were children, when no one else cared. He gave us life, love, and hope. And today, we are here to give him justice." Gasps filled the room as Ben stepped forward, laying the folder on the judge's desk. Inside were records, witness statements, and evidence proving Marcus had been miles away when the robbery took place. Years of quiet research, endless nights of work, and a promise kept alive had led to this moment. Marcus could hardly breathe. He stared at Lily and Ben, his heart breaking and healing all at once. The children he once carried through a freezing night were now carrying him. Against all odds, they had returned, not as the hell. The courtroom fell into silence as Lily opened the folder, her hand steady though her heart raced. Every eye in the room followed her as she placed documents on the judge's desk. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm but carrying the weight of 20 years, "the case against Marcus Johnson was built on lies, rushed investigations, and prejudice." She turned, her eyes sweeping across the jury. "I know this because I lived through it. He raised me when the world left me to die. And I would not be here, a lawyer today, without him." She lifted a stack of affidavits and photographs. Witnesses had come forward, people who remembered seeing Marcus clocking out from the factory at the very moment the robbery took place. Time cards confirmed it. Security footage showed him walking toward the grocery store, not away from it. Everything the prosecution once claimed crumbled under the weight of these facts. Ben stepped forward next, his voice deep with conviction. "I've spent years digging for the truth. What I found was more than enough to prove my father's innocence. The police ignored evidence, they ignored leads, and instead they built a case on the color of his skin. But we are here today to make it right." He spread photographs across the table, images of Marcus with Lily and Ben over the years, proof of the life he built, proof of his character. "This man didn't destroy lives," Ben said firmly. "He saved them, ours." The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably, his arguments unraveling in front of everyone. Murmurs swept through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward, studying the evidence with a furrowed brow. The tension was suffocating, but Lily and Ben stood tall, their voices unshaken, their love for Marcus shining brighter than any accusation. For Marcus, sitting at the defense table, it felt like breathing for the first time in years. His chest swelled with pride and gratitude as he watched the two children he had once rescued now rescuing him. The truth, buried for. The air inside the courtroom was electric, thick with disbelief. For a long moment, no one spoke, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The prosecutor shuffled his papers nervously, his confident mask slipping with every passing second. The jury, who had once avoided Marcus's eyes, now stared at the stack of evidence before them, their expressions shifting from indifference to unease. The judge leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin as he scanned the documents Lily and Ben had presented. The silence stretched unbearably, broken only by the faint scratching of his pen as he made notes. "This," the judge finally said, his voice low but firm, is new evidence that directly contradicts the prosecution's claims. He looked up, his gaze piercing the prosecutor. Why was this not uncovered during the original investigation? The prosecutor stammered, fumbling for words. Your Honor, I can't speak to that, but nothing, the judge cut him off sharply. It appears this case was built on assumptions rather than facts. His eyes turned toward Marcus, and for the first time in years, Marcus saw something other than judgment in them. He saw doubt, even regret. Gasps echoed through the room as Lily stepped closer to her father. Your Honor, Marcus Johnson has already lost 20 years of his life to a system that failed him. If justice means anything, it must begin here, today. Her words trembled at the edges, but the power in them was undeniable. The jury members whispered among themselves, some nodding, some looking ashamed. Finally, the judge raised his gavel, the wood gleaming under the light. This court has no choice but to reconsider the verdict. The life sentence is overturned pending a full review of the evidence. Mr. Johnson is free to go. The gavel struck, and the sound reverberated like thunder. The courtroom erupted in shock, reporters scrambling, spectators murmuring, and guards standing frozen. But Marcus heard and when the judge's gavel came down for the final time, Marcus felt his knees weaken, as though the weight of 20 years had suddenly lifted all at once. The guards removed his handcuffs, and the cold bite of steel gave way to the warm embrace of freedom. For a moment, he just stood there, trembling, unsure if this was real or some cruel dream. Then Lily and Ben were in front of him, their arms wrapping tightly around his shoulders. He held them both, his tears soaking into their clothes, unable to let go. The courtroom around them buzzed with chaos, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, but in that instant, none of it mattered. The only thing that existed was the family he had once saved, now saving him. As they walked out of the courthouse together, the sunlight hit Marcus's face like a blessing. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, savoring air that didn't smell of concrete walls and prison bars. For 20 years, he had longed for this moment, and now it was finally his. Lily clutched his arm proudly, and Ben walked on his other side, steady and protective, as if shielding him from a world that had already taken too much. Outside, people gathered, some cheering, some crying, and others simply watching in awe. Reporters pushed forward with microphones, asking how it felt to be free, but Marcus only smiled through his tears. Ask them, he said, pointing to Lily and Ben. They're the reason I'm standing here today. His voice cracked, but his words carried a truth that silenced even the noisiest crowd. That night, for the first time in 2 decades, Marcus sat at a dinner table without guards watching over him. Lily had cooked his favorite meal, roast chicken with potatoes, and Ben had set the table with candles. They laughed, they cried, and they shared stories of years stolen but not lost. Every bite of food, every sound of laughter, felt like a piece of his soul being restored. Freedom wasn't just walking out of a prison. It was sitting at that table. Years passed after Marcus's release, but freedom never lost its sweetness. He cherished the smallest moments, waking up to the sound of birds instead of prison gates, sipping coffee by the window while sunlight streamed in, and most of all, spending time with Lily and Ben. They refused to let him feel the weight of lost years. Instead, they filled his life with new memories, brighter and stronger than the shadows of the past. Lily had become a respected lawyer, known for her fiery determination to fight against injustice. Every case she took reminded her of Marcus, the man who gave her a chance at life when she had none. Ben, now a celebrated artist, painted canvases that told stories of struggle, hope, and redemption, many of them inspired by the man who had raised him. Both siblings carried Marcus's love in everything they did, and they never let him forget how much he meant to them. Family dinners became their tradition. Around the table, laughter replaced the silence of prison walls, and joy drowned out the bitterness of the years stolen. The highlight for Marcus came the day Lily's daughter and Ben's son clambered into his lap, calling him Grandpa with innocent smiles. The sound pierced his heart, filling spaces that had once been empty with a love he never thought he would know. On one such evening, As candles flickered and the smell of roasted food filled the air, Marcus looked around the table. His eyes moved from Lily to Ben, to their children, and back again. He felt tears sting, but they weren't of sorrow, they were of gratitude. "I thought my life was over," he said softly, his voice breaking. "But love brought me back. You saved me, just as I once saved you." The room grew quiet, but the silence was warm, filled with unspoken truth. Their story had come full circle. What began on a freezing night under a broken streetlight had ended here, in a home glowing with love. Marcus smiled, knowing that kindness had not only changed the course of his life but